Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. My guest today is Dr. Alyssa Kuhn, and she is a physical therapist and osteoarthritis specialist. She's also the founder of Keep the Adventure Alive. She specialises in osteoarthritis treatment because she found that people were getting premature surgeries and ending up with life-changing pain in their 40s and 50s because of this condition. She says this can be prevented when you know what options you have and other ways you can find pain relief aside from surgery. And you all know I like natural kinds of non-interventions in life. So welcome, Alyssa. It's lovely to have you here.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm really interested to dig into this because it's not something I've covered before on here. And I know that it's an issue for a lot of us as we get older, particularly for women. So let's start with, why do you believe that pain and weakness are not inevitable with age?
And this is one of the things that I think is one of kind of the biggest myths around, especially osteoarthritis and joint pain. And it leads us to not seek out help, which is why it's so important to understand this, because if you think it's normal, then you're not going to go find help, and then it gets worse, and then it starts to become disabling. So pain and weakness are absolutely not associated or inevitable with age. It just tends to be that as we get older, we tend to decrease our activity levels, we tend to not try as many new things, and tend to not be as willing to do physical activity, especially if you didn't really grow up with it. A lot of people, like in this generation, exercise just seems to be a much bigger thing than it was previously. And so it can be hard to create kind of these new healthy habits. You don't really know what to do. So we kind of fall into this vicious cycle of, not moving, decreasing our activity, not playing like sports and all of those kinds of things. And then that's when pain and weakness ensues. But if you are able to find good exercise habits, find physical activity that feels good to you, find resources that help you kind of find those things, you don't necessarily either need to have pain, weakness, or both. I know so many people that are in their 80s and 90s. I was in an independent living facility and led like a functional fitness type class. And these people a lot of them were in their mid 80s to even upper 90s. And one woman I think was in her late 90s. But we were doing squats, we were doing jumping, we were doing all sorts of things that you would typically like walk in and be like, oh my goodness. One, I even had to like tell them not to run. So, I mean, these people were like thriving, and they were in this older age, but they also had resources that with exercise, with weight training, with all of these things, they knew that exercise was helpful. And so they were able to thrive and not be in this kind of disabling pain or disabling weakness. But again, a lot of people think that it's common and think it's normal, and then just kind of don't do anything about it, but just kind of say, hey, this is just what I have to deal with. And then that's when those problems ensue. So it's absolutely not normal, but unfortunately is common when we think it's normal.
And I'm guessing the people you were talking about, they wouldn't qualify as super agers, because I know sometimes we see the super agers and we think they're amazing, they're doing this, that, and the other, and we can't possibly come anywhere near to doing what they're doing. So That's another reason not to try. But I'm guessing these people...
Oh, no, these people were very, like, most of the time, I mean, they were doing, like, they were very engaged in, like, the events and stuff that were there. They were always like doing things very socially too, which I think helps. But no, these people were very just kind of regular people who just wanted to, enjoy their last 5, 10, 15 years. And so they just were very proactive about their health. It wasn't like they were, doing all these crazy like ninja things or, some of the things that you see like on Instagram and stuff like that, but very, very regular people.
And how did you get so passionate about this area?
So when I was starting out in physical therapy, I had a couple of different jobs, and one of them was in this independent living facility. This was more of an internship type thing. So I was able to see this. We were able to do all these things that were very, very good for the joints. They were keeping people strong. But then I started working in home care where I would go to people's houses after total knee and hip replacements. So I kind of was able to see both sides of how arthritis can affect people, because the people that were in the class in their 80s, 90s, they all had their own degree of aches and pains and all that sort of thing, but it wasn't really limiting. But then I moved to home care where people were getting joint replacements at 50. Which is young for joint replacements. And I even had a couple in their 40s, and these people were just living with disabling pain in their 40s and 50s. And one woman I met had 7 knee revisions from a total joint replacement on the same knee. And she was only, I think, around 60. And so it just allowed me to kind of see both sides of it, that it can be, not necessarily super limiting if you have the right resources and the right education and the options. But it can also be, like, I was in a lot of rural areas doing the home care. And so these people didn't really have a ton of resources. They didn't really have good health care. They didn't really have the knowledge of the options. And then so this can lead to a lifetime of disability, like people wanting to move out of their homes because they were scared they weren't going to be able to do stairs, and just depending on other people at 50 to do things. And then you think, okay, well, what's your future going to look like if this is now? And so I got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to do something about this, because arthritis does not necessarily, especially osteoarthritis, does not necessarily have to be this disabling, super limiting condition if we take action and if we take the right action. And I live in Utah in the United States, and we have mountains everywhere. And there are so many people out there who want to keep hiking and skiing and biking. But when you look on, like, if you search osteoarthritis online, you see, seated exercises. You see people that are, walking with canes and walkers and things. And now that it's getting diagnosed younger, it's like, if you're super active and then you get diagnosed with this, I have a lot of people that are like, it's a stab to the heart. I just am like devastated, because you see that and you think osteoarthritis, I can't do any of that. But you actually can. And so that's why I am trying to kind of address the adventurous, active population, that you can actually do those things even with osteoarthritis, because there's not a lot of people out there talking about that right now, but it is possible, even running and things like that. So that's kind of how I got into it, and then just kind of ran with it.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Running's possible too.
It's funny because one of my previous guests on the podcast, Tanya Dalton, she was training for an Ironman when she was on the podcast, and subsequently she's done it. But she talked about, she had osteoarthritis in one of her toes, and she still managed to do the Ironman. Which I think is incredible. And yes, she had some pain to cope with, right? But it, as you say, it didn't stop her. It didn't limit her from doing what she wanted to do. And that, an Ironman is an incredible challenge to do for anybody.
Totally, even like 100% healthy. I don't even know if I could do that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, all these things are possible, and it's really just kind of giving the hope and the optimism for people that have arthritis. I mean, I do lots of other things too, but that's one of the biggest things, because again, like you hear this, like, oh, you're bone on bone, your knee is, the cartilage is gone. And you hear all these scary things, but then you don't necessarily receive much like hope. It's always kind of like, avoid this, maybe slow down, take it easy. But you don't necessarily get like much positive information or like encouraging information. And so that is what I am trying to facilitate in creating communities and support groups and things, because it can be really scary, but it doesn't have to be.
Now, you've been using the terms arthritis and osteoarthritis, so I'm very ignorant on the different types and what's
Sure.
going on. So can you explain that a bit and how
So a
it
lot
all
of times,
works?
like when people have painful joints, it's I have arthritis, and that's just kind of a general term
You
that
have it.
people typically use. No, like when they're
Oh,
saying, yeah, when they're saying
oh.
like I have arthritis, or I have my knee has arthritis, that sort of thing.
hmm
Osteoarthritis is technically the term for arthritis that is pretty local to some joints. You can have it on one side, you can have it on both sides, but usually like one side is worse, and they're in a lot of the larger joints, so knee, hips, spine. You can also have it in your hands and in your feet. But the other one is rheumatoid arthritis. The other primary one, there are also other types, but the other primary one is rheumatoid arthritis, which is more of a systemic issue. And you get pain usually like on both sides because it's an autoimmune condition throughout your body. And so that one typically, it definitely is a different breed of arthritis, just because there's a lot more that goes into it, a lot more systemic issues like fatigue, and your joints feel warm and painful, and there are a couple of other side effects with that, and usually that one is controlled with medication and then exercise and movement and that sort of thing. Osteoarthritis, it primarily just presents stiffness, pain. You can have some instability. Typically, you don't necessarily need medications aside from pain medications if you do need them. And like I said, it's usually on one side or the other. One side's typically worse than the other, but is very movement related and is related to inflammation. So those are kind of the two primary ones. There's like psoriatic arthritis and other types of arthritis, but those are kind of the two primary. But typically when people are talking about arthritis, they're usually talking about osteoarthritis. That's just kind of the general term that people have kind of accepted. But there are other types as well.
Yeah, it's quite complicated, isn't it?
It
Getting your
is,
head
yes.
around it. I
There's a lot
know.
of gray. Sometimes people can have a little bit of both. And so,
Yeah.
um, but yes, osteoarthritis is just primarily with the joints. Rheumatoid arthritis, you have some other things going on.
And is osteoarthritis worse for women as we get older?
There has been some research that shows that more women tend to get arthritis. And I don't know if that's necessarily less men report it. So maybe less men just, they have it, but they're not necessarily seeking out help for it, or they're not going to where they could be like recorded. So I don't know if that's part of it. But there are some studies that do show that women have a little bit more susceptibility to it. And there hasn't really been a ton of reasons why necessarily. Menopause can play a part. And so when you have the decreased estrogen, that can be linked to some joint pain. So that could potentially be one of the reasons. But I haven't seen a ton of research necessarily examining the reasons why women are more affected, but it could be a way of women are more likely to seek out help. And so then they're kind of more into the ecosystem of the researchers too. But yeah, it is definitely a little bit more common in women.
Yeah, I bet the whole sort of osteoporosis as well and our susceptibility to that must increase our
Yes.
likelihood of osteoarthritis as well. I don't know. Are they must be connected.
It could be either way. So sometimes I see that when people have osteoarthritis first, they don't move around as much. You're limited by pain, and so that bone density then goes down.
Mm.
But it could also be the other way around too. But there is definitely a correlation, and a lot of people I see actually have both. And so
Mm.
not only are you trying to move and trying to do things with arthritis or osteoarthritis, but you also have osteoporosis on top of that. And so that brings its own modifications and its own considerations with the treatment too.
Mm. Now, obviously, prevention is better than cure. So,
Yes.
what can we do to protect ourselves from pain as we get older?
So honestly, one of the things that I have found to be an amazing way to find joint pain relief is by adding variety to your movement. Because if we think about it, as humans, typically, we tend to spend our lives in a very forward direction or sitting. But anytime we're moving, we're usually moving forward, unless you're being deliberate about playing sports and, exercising and strength training, where you are getting some of that side to side and like backwards movement. But every single movement that we do is likely forward. You're walking forward to the mailbox, you're getting up and walking forward to the kitchen, and it's always forward. And then as we get older, we tend to find an exercise, that we're comfortable with. And a lot of times that's walking. It feels safe and doesn't typically hurt, but that's also forward. If you like running, that's forward. If you like cycling even, we're still in that forward momentum position. We don't get a lot of side to side movement, and we don't get a lot of backwards movement. And honestly, especially if you are actively dealing with joint pain, especially knee, hip, or low back, I always encourage people to start moving sideways, to start walking backwards. I have people like messaging me on Instagram like, oh, I walked backwards in my neighborhood today. It's moving in these different directions that can help, so if you think about the knee, for example, when we're walking forwards, you're stressing the same part of the joint over and over and over again. There are other parts of the joint that aren't necessarily getting as much activity, and they're not necessarily getting used as much. And our cartilage that's between the joint loves movement. It loves when we're weight bearing. It loves when we are in motion. So when we're stressing that same part of the joint over and over and over again, then you start to experience pain. But when we can move in these different directions, you can stress other parts of the joint that can be helpful as far as distributing the stress. And one of the things, like even just simply like stepping side to side, or walking backwards, a lot of these things may be actually initially uncomfortable at first, just because we don't do them very often. But you'll notice that as you keep going, the pain should dissipate as your body's like, what are you doing to me? I don't know how I feel about this. And then the pain starts to dissipate when your body starts to get more confident in it. And walking backwards is one of those. So if you think about the last time you tried to walk backwards, it may have been a while. And so that can be a little bit scary at first. Use support, as you're going down, I always have people try to go down like hallways and things, make sure the path is clear, but it can be a little bit hard on balance too. Moving in these different ways can absolutely help balance, which also is a big part of osteoarthritis relief. You have to have that muscle stability to be able to keep yourself balanced and support the stability of the joint. So honestly, moving in different ways is one of the best things. And then there's strength training, and then there's all sorts of things like that. But especially if you're actively dealing with pain, or even if you're not, I want you to think about how you can get variety throughout the day. And there are lots of things that you can do, but even just simply stepping sideways, walking backwards, those can be extremely helpful in preventing osteoarthritis, but also kind of helping dissipate that pain and that stiffness and get your joint moving in a new way.
It's really interesting you should say that, because I have a friend and I was staying with her in New York. She's American.
Okay.
And I went to the gym with her, and she was on the treadmill, and suddenly she started running backwards on the treadmill, and I thought, what is going on?
Oh my
And
yes.
she explained to me how good it was for us and the balance and everything else. And when I came home, I do actually run backwards.
And that's awesome.
So when I do my run, and sometimes I think, why am I doing this? And now I will just think, Alyssa told me to do it. I will carry on doing it.
It's great for your joints, yeah.
So there's a loop that I do on my run, and then there's a very flat, wide piece of roadway in my local park, and first thing in the morning there's nobody there really, so I
Yes.
can run backwards. I'm not very fast, I'm just sort of plodding, and I'm looking over my shoulder just to make sure there's nothing there.
Right, right. It can be kind of scary. Yeah.
It works. And as what you said about your body adjusting, that's very, very true. I can testify to that, because at first the body's going, what is she doing,
I
taking me
know.
backwards? But then my body now is actually pretty comfortable running backwards, and it
Exactly.
feels good. Yeah.
Exactly. It works the backs of your legs, works your glutes. And it's so simple.
Mm.
But it's the fact of it's weird and you don't want people walking around and you running backwards. But
I do get some funny looks.
exactly. Oh, I have people that message me all the time. And it's just one of those things that moving differently. Because, I mean, back in like the caveman days and stuff, we were all over the place. We were moving in all these different directions. And now we're on this kind of very like one track mindset. And I do have a lot of people that do ask about treadmills and running backwards and like trying to go sideways and stuff. And more power to you if you can do backwards and on the treadmill, because I
I
think the
know.
treadmill would be very, very hard. So I do
Yeah.
recommend like flat ground, like you were saying, first, and then you can get into some of those crazy things. But I know I wouldn't trust myself to run backwards on a treadmill. So
No, I wouldn't either.
yeah.
I
But
was very
it's just the
impressed.
simple things that you can do to start this. And then of course you can get into, like I said, strength training and all kinds of different things. Suspension strap training I like to use a lot. But it's the fact of just starting out simple and then working your way up.
Mm. That's just brilliant. Really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and when we get a diagnosis, as you've talked about this a bit, when we get the diagnosis, it can be really upsetting. So, how best can somebody cope and adapt when they do get this diagnosis?
It can be hard, but there is so much information on the internet right now that is discouraging. So, a lot of just society in general is very discouraging when it comes to osteoarthritis. So, like if you see a surgeon or primary care, or whoever you're seeing for that you receive the diagnosis from, typically they're kind of telling you slow down, take it easy. Like they're kind of instilling this that your joint feels like it's made of like glass, that if you move in the wrong direction, it's going to like shatter and cause all these issues. And then you start to go online and you start looking at things and it's, cartilage damage, deterioration, like all of these scary words. And so it's one of those things that we have to be careful of what you're reading, making sure that it's quality information and that it's, cited in research. And that's what I'm trying to do as far as creating kind of this support group and creating this community of people that encourage each other. Because you can even get on Facebook and you get into some of these groups that, it's just complaining and it's a lot of negativity, woe is me sort of thing, which is not helpful either, because you see all these other people that have arthritis that are like, well, I'm not able to do this, I'm not able to do that, which is why I'm creating some of these communities, because they can be hard to find. And so one of the things with keep the adventure alive is really promoting hope and optimism. And the good thing is, I am seeing, as we're kind of finding more research on osteoarthritis, there are more quality resources and things like that to actually encourage people to exercise and to encourage people that, you can get through this. Surgery is not inevitable, like pushing out some of these things, pushing away the myth that it's just wear and tear. That's a really big one. And if you think that, then you're going to likely limit activity. And limiting activity and rest is one of the worst things you can do. It's just finding the right exercise and the right movement that's going to help your joints. So people are really starting to kind of spread the word and to dispel some of these myths, but they're still out there. And it's just kind of figuring out and listening to quality information. You can follow me on any Instagram, YouTube, wherever, if you need some hope and you need some motivation, because there's a lot of information out there, but it's not necessarily all encouraging and motivating. It can be very depressing. And so It's just kind of taking what you read with a grain of salt and really trying to find outlets that are helpful and that are going to encourage you. I'm trying to coin the term arthritis adventure, and I would love if people would go to the doctor or something and get diagnosed and search arthritis adventure, because you can adventure, but we're looking at, what are the quickest pain relief, and you get all these supplements and all these lotions and creams and all these kind of passive things. And you have to really kind of know that exercise is helpful and that movement is helpful, or else we're just searching for some of these things that might not be helpful and are just kind of putting a Band-Aid on things. And so I don't necessarily have a real answer for that. I just know that there are a lot of people out there pushing out really great information, like the Arthritis Foundation. There are a lot of Versus Arthritis. There are a lot of big companies out there that are really helping to push some of this information. But then there are also some little people out there rooting for you. And so it's just making sure you find something that vibes with you. If you're adventurous and you're active, you find some information out there that helps people that are active and adventurous and want to hike and ski and bike and all of those sorts of things, because it is out there. Just try not to get down the rabbit hole of disease and damage and all of that sort of thing.
I guess it's like so many things that happen to us as we get older. We have more control over it than perhaps we initially think we do.
Exactly.
And with an awful lot of these things, there's a lot of people out there, regular listeners will know this is me climbing gently onto my soapbox. But, there's a lot of people making a lot of money out of making people scared.
Sure.
Out of making
totally.
people nervous and scared. And here's my pill, have this pill. And here's my
Totally.
surgery, which in America is going to cost you an arm and a leg.
Exactly.
And so it's like a different approach where you can take more control over your health, but you've got to be proactive about it rather than just, as you said, rather than being passive and taking the medication and not doing the rest of it.
Exactly. And that's hard in a reactive healthcare system. That's hard. And that's why even just like preventing some of this stuff, like you can stop the progression of it to a certain extent. You can decrease the severity of the symptoms, and you can live a life where you're just kind of living just on a plateau. Maybe you have some pain, maybe you have some occasional stiffness, but you can get to the point where it's not necessarily just like climbing up every day, getting worse every day, but you have to be proactive about it. And like you just mentioned, I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are pushing supplements that aren't doing anything for you. And some of these, like creams and medications and all of these things that are claiming to cure arthritis or claiming to, be this magical thing that's going to take away your pain. But there's really no magic pill. And there's no magic cream, or there's no magic. Those things can help supplement, and supplements are meant to supplement a treatment program. And so they're not an end all be all of pain. So you can't necessarily just rely on these things. Injections, like all of these things, they're not necessarily meant to act on their own. When you get these things, you should take advantage of the pain relief and start moving and start exercising and start just finding ways to actually help your joints in the long term. Using some of these short-term solutions, they can definitely be helpful to kind of open the door to some of those things. But you have to take advantage. And if you don't, then you're just going to be relying on these things that are just going to be giving you that short-term pain relief.
So I'm going to take absolute advantage of you now, and I'm going to ask you about hips, knees, and ankles.
Okay.
So what sort of things can we be doing to protect all three of those? Not necessarily all at the same time.
Right. Well, and you can actually do all at the same time. So honestly, the two things that we just talked about, variety is one of them. So the hip in particular, you have a lot more muscle in your hip compared to your knee. Your hip can move in a lot more different ways than your knee can. And so hips in particular, variety is so important. Sideways walking. You can even add one of those resistance bands and sideways walking that way. moving backwards also helps with hips and knees and even ankles, because your ankle is moving in a little bit different way too. And also, balance is extremely important, kind of all the way up the chain. So hip, ankle, or hip, knee, ankle. And it's funny because I have a lot of people that are like, my balance is great. I don't have any issues with balance. I'm not falling over. But then when you try some of these higher level things, like one of my favorite ones is if you stand on one leg and then you have a weight in one hand and you essentially pass the weight back and forth.
Oh,
And
wow.
I
That's going to be
use this,
hard.
and I use this a lot just for my own like warm ups and things. And the heavier weight that you go, the harder it is. So starting out with like a 5 or something and then upping it. I had one patient who was able to do a 25-pound kettlebell. And if you try this, you will have much appreciation for the ability to do that, because it is hard.
Wow.
But there are so many higher level balance things. And it's not just like stand on one leg or put one foot in front of the other. There are a lot of things. And then essentially, as you're standing on one leg, your hip is kicking in and firing to help stabilize the joint. Your ankle is wobbling and working to stabilize the ankle. And then your knee is also working as well. So balance is an absolute must. And it's a lot of times left out of strength training routines or exercise routines because a lot of people think that it's okay. So balance is one of them, moving in variety, but then also strength movements. So one of my favorite strength movements is a deadlift. And a lot of people get really scared of those, especially as we get older, of doing it wrong and having back pain and all this stuff. But deadlifts are extremely important for all of those joints, not particularly the ankles much, but the hips and the knees. I mean, working the backs of those legs, because again, we're forward, 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 forward. The backs of our legs don't get a ton of work. And if we're not working them with deadlifts and, lunges, there is a way to do lunges that aren't going to flare up knee pain. I know a lot of people have knee pressure and things with lunges and squats and all these sorts of things. There are so many strength movements, kettlebell swings. Because it's funny, a lot of times when we have arthritis, or as we even get older, it's, slow down, take it easy. We want to do everything slow, but explosive movements like jumping. I have a lot of people jump with arthritis, and even like kettlebell swings and like powerful movements where you are moving quicker is so helpful for muscular power, which is speed and strength together, because power declines quicker than strength when we get older. And so if you're not challenging some of those quicker movements, then you may lose those, and standing up and down from a chair and things may become harder. That requires muscle power. And so it's just, there are lots of different things, but variety, balance, and then some specific strength movements can be very, very helpful.
And just remind me what a deadlift is.
So you're standing and you have two weights kind of resting on your thighs and with your arms straight in front of you. And you're essentially just hinging over. So you're sitting your hips back and then standing up tall. And you're hinging down. Yeah. So I would just, if you're listening, you can Google it. But
Google it.
but yeah, you're essentially starting with like slightly bent legs. You're kind of hinging over and then you're standing straight up.
Okay. Cool. That's very good. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I know, and I guess we've got to keep them flexible by not sitting down too much as well, haven't we?
Exactly. Trying to just move as often as our bodies are meant to move. And so the longer that we sit, even standing, like standing desks have become the huge craze, at least here in the States. But even standing for a long period of time is not necessarily great for you either. It's the best posture is the one that you're in and out of. So standing, sitting, trying to move and change postures as much as you can.
Wow. So that's fantastic. And you talked about actually being able to reverse it. Is that, or slow it down or make it stop? Is that mainly through exercise?
It's a part of it. So you can reverse the severity of the symptoms. You can't necessarily reverse osteoarthritis completely, but if you reverse that severity, then you're not necessarily limited by pain. And that's kind of the goal. Like the goal for osteoarthritis is not to completely like get rid of pain. You will still have a little bit of pain and a little bit of stiffness, but getting to the point where it's not limiting you. And that's kind of where the goal, decreasing the severity and the frequency of the pain. And you can't necessarily stop it, but you can kind of stall the progression. You can slow the progression, and inflammation is a big root cause of that. And that's kind of a whole other rabbit hole, but food plays a part too, like watching what you're eating. And then exercise is a huge part of that, strengthening, those sorts of things. But also sleep plays a part, stress plays a part. There are a lot of, I had a group of people with bone-on-bone knee arthritis, so severe knee arthritis. And before we even got to the exercise portion, so many people had relief already. And that was just going through the stress, the sleep, the food, all the other things that can impact it. So exercise is by no means the only way, but exercise is a must if you have arthritis. And even if you don't, if you want to prevent anything, it's a must. But you have to make sure you're doing the right things. But there are other things that can play a part in that. Getting all these other ducks in a row too can be really helpful.
It's that holistic approach. It's always
totally
the way, isn't it? Always,
yeah.
You can't just compartmentalize. You've got to think about the whole body.
Exactly. And inflammation is kind of the new buzzword lately, with all the, chronic conditions and things. And the research is there to back it. And it's just, inflammation is not only just for osteoarthritis, but just for healthy lives in general. Being able to control as much of that as you can is imperative.
So as we wind up, is there anything else, any other gems of information that you would like to impart?
Don't give up, and don't think that because you have arthritis, you cannot adventure, because there are so many people, even if you know someone that has osteoarthritis, because a lot of times we get information from friends, from family. So if you know somebody that has osteoarthritis, then absolutely send them my way, because it's creating this positive ecosystem, which is essentially what I'm doing. I have so many people who reach out. They're like, you're the first person to give me hope, and you're the first person to be encouraging. And that's what I'm trying to get through, because you can adventure. You can walk, run, ski, hike, bike. You can do those things with the right tools. And so I don't want you to dream small just because you have arthritis, but you also have to be willing to do the work to get there as well, which it's not necessarily, just a couple of weeks and then you can do these things. It is a process, and there is a form of dedication and commitment that you need. But I have people that got back to backpacking. One woman just went 18 miles. And there are people that have been doing amazing things. But also, if you just want a small adventure of being able to walk to your mailbox or walk around the block with your neighbor, that is possible too. And so there are possibilities, and there is hope. And I just want to continue to spread that. And if you know someone that has osteoarthritis, please send them this episode to at least get started and at least kind of change the mindset, because we can do this, but we are just working on changing things that have been around for years and years and years. So there is hope.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife: Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.